Do you ever feel like what we're really doing is too much like pornography? Yeah, you feel that way. That's because what you're doing really is pornography. But for the rest of us, it's this undercurrent of bad feeling that the public, the government, the teachers, they think we're a social ill. And we kind of are. There's a whole bunch of side effects and problems that have been caused by games. And games have kind of taken over. Games are now monopolizing the attention of the digital natives that are growing up. So this is an issue. We've got other issues. One that I want to talk about a little bit maybe first is something else that I know you're feeling. Don't you feel like you're trying to make a hit in a market where there are a million ways for people to be entertained, millions of ways that are pretty good, and you're trying to make it into that top 5 that's making all the revenue in the App Store, and that it's never been that tilted between the haves and the have-nots? So we're all kind of dealing with that issue, and I want to talk about that briefly and then go back to the first point about what we can do to stop being viewed as a social ill. But that's a big pivot point for us. It's also a big pivot point to figure out how to make games that are more likely to be successful. And to be a successful game, of course, it's got to get out and be widely used. We've already solved that problem with free-to-play, but it's got to be engaging. We're pretty good at that. We know how to make things that are fun. But we're at a point now where it's all about virtual goods monetization. And that is a different problem than what our industry is accustomed to solving. And I'll just point out that 40 years ago, nobody knew how to make a video game. And we were kind of crawling. And 25 years ago, we had to make a shift from 2D to 3D. And the guys that had been the best at making the 2D games were hackers that had never gone to college. And suddenly, they didn't know enough about math to make a good 3D game. And you had to have a project lead that basically either had a PhD or a master's in math and knew how to do the matrix transforms and really crank out the 3D frame rate, because the performance was quite limited. And of course, the discipline of game design had to shift over and say, hey, what do I do in a 3D space that's fun? And how do I deal with issues like collision detection and so on? And it took a number of years for the industry to get to be good at that, but it got way, way bigger because of that. So now we have a different problem because everyone's trained to do that, and it doesn't matter so much anymore. All that matters is whether or not your game monetizes. And clearly, it's an art. It's not yet a science. It hasn't been made systematic. So there really isn't any company out there that has, every time out, made a game that monetizes well with virtual goods. Everybody struggled with it. But there are ways you can make this much more systematic. We as an industry in the next 5 years will figure out how to do it more like a science, and we'll get consistent at it. And it's going to allow the game industry for the first time in history to get to be over $100 billion a year in size. And I was the first guy that predicted that that would happen this decade. And of course, when I said it, of course, it was a long time ago. And nobody really talked about it because it was such a stupid thing to say, like many stupid things that I say. And sometimes they turn out to be really stupid things, and occasionally they're just like clairvoyant. And I think this is one of them, is that I know that we're all going to figure this one out because we figured it out before. And it's about not just thinking you're an artist that's going to make the next big hit. It's about being systematic, more like a scientist. And we did that with EA Sports. You know, EA Sports was not about inventing some new play mechanic. It was about saying, there's an audience that cares about NFL football, that would like to get into it through a video game, but you've got to make an authentic NFL football game. That's what they'll buy. And it was a hard thing to do, and it required a very different kind of recipe. And I'll talk a little bit later about how I'm applying that recipe now to the field of education. But on this point about monetization, I just want to tell you a little story about what happened in Finland. So I started doing development in Finland 10 years ago. I started working with a group of guys that had been struggling. They'd made a few decent little action games that had done well on some of the carrier decks in Europe. And then we kind of evolved that into a bigger, stronger company, Digital Chocolate. And then some of those developers left and went to a new company called Rovio. And I think they were probably a little bit inspired by our game Crazy Penguin Catapult, in which there are flightless birds being launched by a catapult and knocking things down. And it was basically a bird against a four-legged animal that was the antagonist. Sound familiar? So I mean, this is one thing about Angry Birds that I've never quite understand is that, so they're birds. Why do they need to be shot out of a slingshot? I think I know why. I think I know where that idea originated. I'm not trying to take anything away because they made a hell of a great game. And hey, creativity is the rearranging of the old in a new way. So that's all good. That's all fine. But what we all know about Rovio is that they made 50 games before that game. And then let's talk about the guys that also left Digital Chocolate and comprise a lot of the team at Supercell. I guarantee you, I know about the journey these guys have been on for the last 10 years, and there were a lot of failures along that way. And we had several attempts to make free-to-play virtual goods games that failed. And even after Supercell started, their first product failed as well. But here's the thing about the Finns you have to understand. First of all, they're pretty creative. You know, they don't really have a reputation for being creative, but they're pretty creative. But what they're really good at is science. So again, you think about Northern Europeans evolving for 1 million years up in the frigid cold of Northern Europe. You got to have your game on. You got to figure out how you're going to freaking get through the winter. So you better be disciplined and organized and process masters. And this is just something about a Finnish culture. They're really great at process. They're really good at figuring out systems of doing things that are steadily improving in efficiency and effectiveness. And that's what they did. Both Rovio and Supercell just stuck with it, and they kept getting smarter and better until it paid off. And that's what everybody in this industry now has to do about understanding virtual goods economies. And the simplest parallel there is that if you go into a retail store, particularly a really good retail store, like the way, say, a woman goes into a department store, the leaders that run that store are what are called merchandisers. And they have figured out how to create a space that's an adventure game. And they literally plot about this and think, okay, she's going to come in this door, and she thinks she's getting a Father's Day present for her husband, and she's going to go buy him a tie. But first, we're going to lure her over here to try on a pair of shoes. And then she's going to smell this free perfume sample. And then she's going to buy a blouse. And then she's going to get 3 pairs of socks for the husband. And they're trying to figure out how to keep you in the game. And everything's for sale. And it's designed to be an adventure. So that sounds pretty familiar. That's kind of what we do. But obviously, the discipline of game design, for years, it focused on how to engage with 3D technology, and then it focused on how to have good retention rates and engagement. Well, it fails if it's not monetizing. So in the modern world of game design, a game designer has to be first thinking about how to motivate people in that adventure to have things that they want to buy, and to actively want to make that favorable trade-off between spending time or spending money, and realizing that, yeah, in some cases, it's a lot more efficient to spend money. And of course, there are some games, I think Candy Crush Saga, what I think is so brilliant about how they did it is that, again, that game is kind of pornographic if you think about it. You know, a lot of people get stuck on level 15, and I've had several people say to me, yeah, I can't figure out how to get past level 15. And I go, well, you can't unless you spend a couple of bucks. You know, but clearly, a lot of people aren't noticing that the game is designed to punish you if you're not spending money, and they're getting away with it. So I'm not saying we want to be punishing gamers. I'm just saying that you got to get a whole lot smarter about virtual goods as a science. So that's going to happen. I don't have any doubt over the next 5 years. And again, I think what's happened in Finland is a great role model for the rest of us to follow. Okay, so let's go back to the first point about the social ill. If you look at the early stages of television, there was a lot of stuff that really wasn't really great for kids to watch. And a parent back in those days was thinking, I've got two media choices for my kid. They can watch television, and I don't like that, or they can read. How do I get them to read more? What my mother did was she recognized that I cared about football and baseball, and that my heroes were star players in those sports. So my first non-picture books that I received as gifts were biographies of football and baseball players. And then she put in front of me an issue of a free magazine one day, and it had Sandy Koufax on the cover. I was in LA, I was a Dodger fan. So, okay, great. I'm gonna look into it because Sandy Koufax is on the cover. And she checks in later to see if I like it, and I gave her 2 thumbs up. She then gave me for my birthday a subscription to Sports Illustrated. And I'm still a subscriber. How's that for lifetime value? So that's what the choice was. That's what was available to the parent in those days. And same thing, a teacher in a classroom would be thinking, yeah, we want kids to do more reading. It's all about getting them to do more reading. And of course, the didactic model in a classroom where, okay, people are going to pay attention to what blah, blah, blah is coming out of the teacher's mouth, and then they're going to go home and do supplemental reading. Hey, at least it did work for a few hundred years. It had a good run. It doesn't work anymore. Why? Because where is their attention? It's right here. And it's pretty pervasive. And that's why we're perceived as a social ill. We're taking a lot of the blame for that, because what do they want to do on those devices? They want to play a game. And the one thing that the parents and the teachers are pretty sure about is that game has no applicability to real life and no value whatsoever. So they don't know about the neuroscience that has proven that the single best way to increase human intelligence and to grow more neurotransmitter connections and neurogenesis, new brain cells, is through interaction. The most efficient way to deliver synthetic experience is through simulation in games. A lot of them don't know that because they're just seeing all these Angry Birds getting launched, and they're just fed up with it. And they say, honey, come to the table for dinner, and it's like, you really have to just, hello, get the device out of the way. So it's become a real battleground, and parents are building up a lot of resentment about it. And certainly teachers have resentment about it as well, because they can tell that they don't have the kids' attention anymore. Well, what's really powerful about this opportunity is that scientists have found that the best ways to be motivated are if the motivation is intrinsic and autonomous, which means it's of your own free will, your own volition, choosing to do it for your own reasons. And if you think about it, that's exactly what we have. We know how to get kids to want to be in a game and be motivated to do what is cool to do in that game. Particularly, themes around being a hero in that game. So you've got their attention. That's also critical to learning. And you've got their motivation. How do you build around that? So I would posit that there's an opportunity as an industry to invade a whole new market and create a whole new market segment, because for the first time in history, women are curating the content on these devices that's going to be used in homes and in classrooms. And they're looking for things that have value, and there's not very much. There's just not very much out there. I mean, yeah, if you're talking about 3-year-olds and you wanting to have them learn the animal sounds or maybe start to learn the alphabet, there's too much of that, and it doesn't have a lot of value. If you're talking about teenagers and young adults, all of the things on the internet are fabulous. Maybe you don't even need games. Once teenagers develop their own interests, they'll be motivated to go study what they want to learn about. They'll go to Khan Academy. They'll do internet online courses. That revolution's underway. The sweet spot of opportunity here is kids that are 6 to 12. These are the ones that are not yet individuated as teenagers. They're still under the media control and influence of the parent, and they're much more highly suggestible and willing to cooperate with what parents want them to do, just like I was with my mom. And that's where there's kind of a vacuum in terms of great content. And by the way, my favorite example, I think the best product for kids in that category is Minecraft. And there's a new thing called Minecraft EDU, and there's a teacher that used that, and she is an English teacher, and she needed to teach Hamlet. So she built the Old Globe Theater in Minecraft and had all the kids come in and have roles in the play or roles in the theater and act the whole thing out. How cool is that? So there's just tremendous value there. But I saw a research report recently where the vast majority of parents in this research said that Angry Birds had absolutely no educational value. And the majority said that Minecraft had no educational value. They're lumping Minecraft into the same category with Angry Birds, which is completely unfair. So how do you change that perception? I think there's 3 things you have to do. First of all, you have to have fun gameplay at the foundation, because if you don't have that, you're going to lose the kids in the first place. Then you have to have legitimate curriculum that the government cares about. And then finally, you're going to have a genuine way of assessment, meaning testing and measuring, so you know that something got learned, and then it might transfer to changes in real-world behavior. Well, the funny thing about that list of 3 things, as we all recall, the first example of that appeared over 30 years ago. Typing games, typing tutors. We're going to shoot down some spaceships, and we're going to keep track of our typing speed and accuracy. It's real curriculum. Great. And then 30 years went by, and it didn't happen again. What the heck? But there were plenty of attempts to do things that were educational. They just didn't really conform to that formula of those 3 things. And generally, on the academic side, they didn't know that it had to be really fun, and they didn't have the professional expertise to compete at the highest echelons of entertainment competition. So those efforts, which were very sincere and earnest, none of them ever scaled. Meanwhile, if we just want to be honest, the game industry is a bunch of young men that want to make games that they want to play. That's what I did for 20 years myself. And a lot of the industry is comprised by people that have not been parents, don't really understand boys and girls of different ages, and that don't really tap into parental communities and school communities, and don't know a lot about what teachers are trying to do either. And there hasn't been an effective collaboration between those 2 sides. So this is where the EA Sports model comes in, because that's exactly what we're doing. And if you think about that model, it's a recognition that game developers have to be the masters of technology, the masters of the tools, and have the mastery of platforms that the consumer is going to use, and the user experience and gameplay requirements that are competitive at that time, that are state of the art. But they can't do it alone. And among other things, they have to kind of give up a little bit of creative control in order to be able to design to a specification. Just like we did with Madden football. It's like there's an NFL rule book. You've got to conform to that. There's a look and feel of football on television. You've got to conform to that. You don't just have complete creative freedom. You have to accept that. But then also you need to bring in experts like your John Madden, and then you want to bring in content like NFL plays and big data, player names and faces and statistics. And then, of course, you've got the specifications like the rule book. So we're doing that in the field of education. The curriculum topic of our debut game, which is called If, and If, by the way, the name comes from the Kipling poem that starts, "If you can keep your head while all about you are losing theirs." It's a wonderful poem about human spirit and values and character. And this has now been kind of reframed in a very politically correct, not religious, not ethnic way that's called SEL, social and emotional learning. And the government has really gotten behind this in the last few years and started to push, because there's a huge set of issues with school climate. And this is a skill set around managing emotions and building positive relationships that just got lost over the course of the last 100 years. And we know that it's really got to be brought back and it's got to be scaled, even though today, for example, there's no standardized textbook for it. It's kind of a grassroots movement. So we have a shot at scaling through a game in doing this. And some of you remember about 15 years ago, a book came out called Emotional Intelligence. We work with the experts that were featured in that book. They're our kind of John Madden equivalents. And now there are published government teaching standards. That's kind of the equivalent of the NFL rule book. There are lesson plans that are the equivalent of the Oakland Raiders playbook that I build all the plays from for Madden football. So it's a similar recipe, and it's about getting everybody to see the bigger picture, realize that you're doing something systematic. And the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it, and the more you can apply it to extending your curriculum and getting it into new areas. So I think there's a huge opportunity in this space, huge opportunity in this space. And it can also use a subscription model, which is a much more predictable way of floating your boat. And it makes a lot of sense because you've got the parent or the teacher as kind of a regulator that wants to keep the kid in it because it has value. I guarantee you, if I had gone back to my mom after a few months and said, I don't want to read this anymore, she would have tried to talk me out of it. She would have tried to convince me, no, you really want to read this, trust me. You really want to read this. Let's just wait to see what the next issue is about. Hey, honey, here it is. Let's sit down and let's look through it together. So this is a new market. It's a new business model where you've got the parent motivated to get the kid to play certain games. But the games have to fulfill those principles. And we're only biting off a small part of this in the area of curriculum that we're focused on. I think this is a big opportunity for the industry as a whole. Thank you for listening. Take care.